So this is the first edition of the world exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street by the KhoodeelaarTV Channel, brought to you by the KhoodeelaarTV campaign defending the community in the East End of London. This KhoodeelaarTV brand of action has been uniquely active since December 2003. And so this is 17 years. And we have been citing, sometimes we have been citing relevant items from the organs in Fleet Street, including from this table of the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch. As we have been doing on the Facebook account. So what is happening here is that we have a cartoon from Peter Brooks published on this day in 2018. And the cartoon is a take, Peter Brooks' take on a demo against Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said to Jacob Rees-Mogg's children that Jacob Rees-Mogg, their daddy, was a horrible person. And the entirety of the Fleet Street kind of organs were against the person who was demonstrating. That person is, of course, a quite well-known activist of some sort from the left. And he has been replaced in this cartoon by Peter Brooks with the figure of Theresa May. Now, Theresa May was under severe pressure from the corrupt ERG fronted by Jacob Rees-Mogg, the crook, at the time. So Theresa May is being shown as demonstrating against Jacob Rees-Mogg and his children, the children being the Tories, including Boris Johnson, who was being held by Jacob Rees-Mogg as the youngest child in that caricature. So that's dated the 14th of September 2018. And Theresa May is saying in the bubble, "Your daddy is a horrible person." Now that is in the Times from the 14th of September 2018. Now, it is absolutely ironic that Peter Brooks got that spot on, and it is now haunting Boris Johnson. The way that he hounded Theresa May out of number 10 or out of the spot of the leadership of the Conservative Party has come back full circle and even more. So we shall be looking at the contents of the papers today, but I don't think even the Times should be remembering what Peter Brooks said, but we have a check. So we start with whatever the paper comes in. Let's say what the Times is doing on the cartoon page or cartoon spot today on page yes, it's not a Peter Brooks cartoon, it's somebody else, and it's on page 25, and it's Boris Johnson is shown in three kind of postures. Who cares if it breaks the law? That's the internal market bill that he's pushing. And then secondly, he is confused, or he's asking a backbencher who is not visible. And then the third one, it says, "Police, I want to report a large group breaking the law. Rule of 6. So it's Boris Johnson being shown as completely messed up and confused and contradictory and dishonest and clueless and out of his minds. Even if he expresses any of his delusions in Latin, there will be delusions. So anyone who says that his Latin skills are somehow kind of evidential markers of his intellectual superiority. That's not the case, as I have been saying. You can lie in Latin as much as you can lie in English. And even the non-human creatures take instructions when given in English or in Latin. It depends on the vibrations and the communications. Now, the Times has got a kind of backtracking editorial today, because the Times was backing Boris Johnson 2 days ago, and today it is saying that if the government believes the EU has acted in bad faith, sufficient to justify breaking international law, it should provide compelling evidence. Now, this is stupid. It's not about bad faith or good faith. It's about the actual contents of the contract. That's the starting point. And the Times supported Boris Johnson breaking the law 2 days ago. And now it is capitulating somewhat to the opposition which is growing inside the ranks of the Conservatives in the House of Commons. And we shall be dealing with those in due course today. And the first thing is this guy Cox. So as I have said in the Twitter account, KhoodeelaarTV account, he didn't need any coaxing. So this Cox was brazen in his backing of Theresa May when he was Attorney General under her. And he was caught kind of abusing Channel 4 News' John Slow as making a comment that was bollocks. And that is what Geoffrey Cox became known as for that time. The point of all this is that the Times is as ignorant as Boris Johnson. The Times is edited or misedited or wrongly edited by as corrupt set of individuals as Boris Johnson is. And we shall see the rest of the so-called media, Fleet Street papers. We haven't got the Guardian today. The outlet where we get these papers didn't have the Guardian today at that time, which was local time about 7:30 this morning. So what is happening on the paper's front pages is that the Times is leading with Geoffrey Cox and is reporting him in a kind of paraphrase in the subheading, Johnson risks unconscionable harm by ripping up treaty, says former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox. And the main headline is Law Chief leads Brexit rebellion. He's not Law Chief anymore. That is another slight subliminal kind of trick by the Times to trick the gullibles and the brainwashable into thinking that he is still in power. Geoffrey Cox is not in power in that sense, but the Times wants to magnify the kind of image of the opposition to the Boris Johnson's latest corruption and illegality and criminal abuse of position. And as I said, the cartoon today is not by Peter Brooks, who is the main kind of, if you like, sharpest cartoonist on the Times, at least. And it is somebody else, and they're saying that he is he is all over the place, Boris Johnson is. So he doesn't care whether it breaks the law. And then he says that the police should come and arrest these people who are violating the rule of six, which is a pun on the line that has been peddled by the ministers in the Boris Johnson fronted regime, saying that the public should call the police, especially this guy Kit Malthouse is the melting. I mean, he has no morality. He has always forever melting morality. All the conservatives are immoral, and that is the whole point. I mean, as is evident in the latest disclosures about Philip Hammond, who was supposedly a principled finance minister who was opposed to the Brexit thing, and he is no longer in government or an MP, but he has been rewarded more than enough. And he is now dealing with the Arabs, the source of money, the Arabs with the money, not the Arabs with the kind of intellectual or moral challenge to imperialism and corruption, like some of the Iraqis were, or some of the Libyans were, or the Syrians, or whatever. It is the Arabs who have the money, and they need to be pandered to and be approached with caution and courtesy. And so what is happening with the Philip Hammond is happening all over the place. And Boris Johnson has rewarded all of them, Ken Clark, etc., etc. And they're as bad intellectually, morally, as the rest of them. And it is a complete fraud to say that Boris Johnson is an exception and this Jeffrey Cox and others are rebelling. They're not rebelling at all. This is just an opportunistic tinkering. And I'm saying that they will not unseat or dethrone or throw out Boris Johnson from his spot as leader of the Conservative Party. The Conservatives are the natural home in the UK of the majority of the racists and the majority of the imperialists and the majority of the big business crooks and offshore traders and all the other collections of criminals operating under the protection of the Conservative as a party, political party. So they have been running, or the Conservative Party has been the place which has given home to the most corrupt liars who have been braying and lying for decades against the UK, being a member of the European Union or whatever the equivalent was a few years ago, because they know that membership of the European Union or its equivalent compels them or compels the UK as a signatory state to abide by rules and requirements and charters and conventions and agreements and declarations and treaties that are way above the dark ages racist, imperialist, backward equivalent that exists in the UK without international membership. And these dark ages want to go back to darkness. And that is why all the racists have coalesced behind the racists fronted by the corrupt serial liar Boris Johnson. And so what the Times is saying about Jeffrey Cox and what the Sunday paper said about Tony Blair, Tony Blair and John Major opposing or condemning or criticizing Boris Johnson, that is factually correct, but it's not politically of any significance at all, because there are 80 plus MPs in the House of Commons. So any vote calculated or collected, counted votes will go for Boris Johnson, whatever he wants, and it will go for a long time. And there is nothing on the horizon politically that suggests that things will be, the balance, the numbers will change because something phenomenal would happen under the initiative of Keir Starmer or whoever is supposedly the leader. And there is no other political party. Scottish National Party have been marginalized by the racists of the English Conservatives. And the Labour Party in Parliament has colluded with the Conservative in anti-Scot kind of autonomy and the demand for the Scottish people to have a proper say in their affairs. So the actual numbers that are available in the House of Commons, after deducting or leaving aside the SNP, is really a big majority held by the Johnson-fronted Conservatives. And these people will vote for Johnson. All the records in the past indications show that. And it was the case with the electorate on the 12th of December 2019. Despite the so-called grandees and heavyweight opponents of Brexit, like Dominic Grieve, like Kenneth Clarke, and from the kind of ancient period in terms of contemporary political career, kind of length of career, Michael Heseltine, despite all of their kind of correct analysis of Boris Johnson and the ERG and others lying and leading the country to the darkness, the people voted for the darkness. And that was facilitated additionally by the stupidity of the Labour Party leadership. The Labour Party doesn't have a narrative. It still has no narrative. Here you are hearing this and you are listening to this exclusive, world exclusive. The Labour Party is dead politically at this minute. On the morning of Monday, the 14th of September 2020, the Labour Party politically in the UK is dead. It has no narrative. It has no narrative. It has no commentary. It has no analysis. And it applies to housing. It applies to the destruction of local so-called accountability. It applies to everything that government and governance and democracy are supposed to be about, delivering. And there is no evidence that the Labour Party is waking up. And despite the fact that Keir Starmer is apparently being spared the criticism that the Fleet Street heaped on Corbyn for a completely different reason rather than his intellect, which is where I'm concentrating and shall be concentrating in all my analysis of Corbyn, not his personality or his kind of supposed potential capability of threatening the UK as a communist. Corbyn was never a communist. My understanding of communism says that Corbyn did not understand and he still doesn't understand communism. Nor does any of his so-called camp followers and co-appearees on the so-called dangerous enemies television screens like the Iranian television, Press TV, bought the time and the appearances of Jeremy Corbyn, Ken Livingston, George Galloway. None of these people, none of them, and these are the three. These are among the three of the most oft-quoted so-called leftists of the time before George Galloway staged another series of detours and became an ardent Brexiteer and a friend of racists, anti-Muslims, and pro-fascists and anti-democrats. But the time I'm talking about is time before the Brexit madness was foisted. And Ken Livingstone and George Galloway and Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell to a lesser extent, of course, these people have been given platform by the Communist Party, CPGB, which has given a false impression that they are somehow sympathetic to the communists. They were nothing of the sort. They were actually as opportunistic in appearing as names on the Morning Star as the Morning Star was opportunistic in showing that it cared for these left kind of politicals or MPs at the time. Most of them were MPs. And everything has withered away. The Communist Party CPGB has not got a narrative. The CPGB has got no narrative, no analysis, no on the ground, frontline information, news, analysis, nothing. And nor has the Guardian, so-called. The Guardian is, of course, now completely anti kind of social, and it is pro right wing, and the veneer of being caring and whatever is commercial marketing strategy. And Kath Weiner is as corrupt, as racist, as reactionary, as complicit with the status quo of racism and imperialism and capitalism as Alan Rabisha Raspriger was when he was editor after the Peter Preston, the racist. So all these papers and the mainstream media and the so-called alternative Morning Star are failing to provide the basic truth to the public, to the people, to the readers, to the viewers. And that is something that we are pointing out daily. And we have been in before this channel was inaugurated due to the lockdown. We have been publishing for years. And I have been speaking for a very long time. It's fact, chapter, and verse. I am the original diagnostic professor of the British mainstream media and its subsidiaries. And I've been doing it for longer than any of the emeritus professors has been doing before they became emeritus at any of the universities or academics or institutions in the UK, come to the or anywhere else. So what I'm saying is based on that length, that depth, and that width, and that intensity of evidential examination. There is nothing in any of the papers, there is nothing in any of the research papers, there is nothing in any of these so-called media courses that actually takes anywhere near the kind of analytical, truthful, campaigning, rigorous approach that I have been taking. And I talk about Sheffield, I talk about Glasgow University, and I talk about some of the others who have been running courses about media. But these are courses not examining the media, not investigating the media, and therefore not investigating society, not investigating the politicians or the political operatives and crooks. They are supporting these crooks. The media is being misconstrued and misused and misdirected as a supporting mechanism and platform for the crooks in power, either as business persons or as political persons. There is hardly any difference because the businesses control the politicos. And we are not even talking about the military industrial complex, which superimposes overreaching the whole kind of entire society in UK, and the gearing of the political thinking for war and conflict and neo-imperialism and the persistence of deprivation and poverty creation and denial of human rights. All of these are being perpetuated by these media so-called courses under the veneer of study courses. And despite the boasts that Glasgow University's media outfit makes, it is as bad as the rest of them. and I challenge them to produce the evidence that counters my finding and my analysis and my diagnosis. And there is nothing, even in the USA, of course, there is nothing in the USA, the Columbia Journalism School and all the other places. They are not studying. If they had been studying, there would have been no Trump. There would have been no Iraq war. There would have been none of those things. So the essential evidence is in the result. As the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If there were any studies really ethical, there is no ethics in the minutes and in the procedures of the UK's National Union of Journalists, to take an example, which pretends to be on the left. It has not done anything. Its members have been supporting xenophobic, brazen race hatred and racist incitements for decades. And the NEJ has not disciplined anyone. It has been decades since Tom Duncan, the editor, so-called, of the Newham Recorder, was in the news for his racist behavior and racist editorial and editing policies and practices. And the NUJ has retreated from that kind of examination and disciplining of its members. And that was Tom Duncan was disciplined nearly 40 years ago. So the UK's mainstream media, typified by the Times because of the history of the name Times as the newspaper of record. Because of that alone, the Times is often typical representative of the line and the lying influence. So as I said, Jeffrey Cox is being overhyped in the Times today. And there is nothing of substance in anything the Times is saying there that shows that the illegality, the latest illegality, latest abuse of parliament, latest corruption by the Boris Johnson fronted cabal in control of the Tory party, this will not be stopped. The Tories won't stop it. They never intended to stop the Conservatives, because if they in any way think that their action against Johnson's illegality will help the Tories losing government power, they won't do it. That's as simple as that. And Keir Starmer is failing to capture the imagination and expand and start a narrative that not only exposes the Brexit corruption and criminality, but exposes the destruction of the idea of the NHS, the idea of a law and order and due process society, and creates the atmosphere for the bringing into being of a legal system that delivers redress to people without obstructing the victims of legalized oppression, denial, eviction, homelessness, poverty, and other things. There is no sign of that. There is no evidence of that. And I'm holding the Times, and there is nothing in the Times. The itsy bitsy things there are completely sub-pornographic bits and semi-pornographic bits. And there is this Claire Forges who is also having a go at the Black Lives Matter, and she is referring to Martin Luther King Jr. And she is saying that quotas for diversity in jobs, etc., betray Dr. King's dreams, and also giving out jobs and awards in line with criteria on race, ethnicity, or gender is well-meaning but will reinforce division. Now, I have been saying this differently, of course, because she's a white person and she has got no evidence anywhere near comparable to the evidence that I have been confronting every day and assessing every day for decades. As I said yesterday, 47 years, 48 years. It's almost 50 years. There's 5 decades on the land in England. And I have been engaged in defending the community since long before I arrived here physically. And I've been defending this on constitutional law grounds, defending the East End of London on constitutional law ground, ethical, moral grounds, long before the race relations legislation in England began to be enacted under the leadership of Anthony Lester, who has recently died, and his colleague, the solicitor. And what I have been doing for the last, let's say, 6 decades in the context of the British media and the politics and the ethnicity is that I have been saying things no one else has even now said. And everything I've been saying has been vindicated, more than vindicated. And this piece by Claire Foggis on the Times today is one other vindication. I mean, so outraged have the opportunist careerist post holders been by my timely diagnosis and expose of their opportunistic service that one of them, Peter Newsome, joined Ken Livingston and some other criminals in an orchestrated attack piece that the Guardian carried against me in March 1992. And that was actually based on my work, which was effective. Obviously, it was effective in highlighting the racism in the education bureaucracy. I was defending the parent governors at the school at that time called the Stratford School, based in Newham, not far from Stratford, that became the focus of the Olympic and all that, 20 years later. But 20 years before the Olympics, I was active in defending the parent governors and parents as a whole of the Stratford School. It was a kind of diabolical position that school was in, because Newham being a Labour kind of council, and this school being at that time just been converted into Grant Maintain or GM school. Grant Maintained is a kind of structure that is introduced by the Conservatives, and it has got serious shortcomings and differences from the so-called comprehensive model that the Labour Party introduced and favors. But my intervention in the defense of the parents was not about the difference between GM status and the comprehensive status of the schools. My intervention was prompted by the media, Fleet Street. I didn't live in Newham, and I didn't have a direct contact with the school at the time. But I was monitoring the behavior of the school governors and the behavior of the school head teacher from a distance. And one afternoon, there was an item in the evening No Standard. The reason I call that paper No Standard is included in the evident in that particular role it played. So the evening Standard was looking for an angle from which it could pin the point of blame at the Muslim chair of the governors. I didn't know this man, and I had no interest in his religion or whatever. I was representing the campaigning organization, London Collective of Black Governors, whose name I had changed since I took over at AGM of the organization held in a school in Camden in 1988, I think. So that was 88, and 4 years after that, this organization became involved in the first comprehensive, that is widespread, media reported intervention. And the reason I intervened was that this man, Ghulam Rasool Shaida, he's from, I think, the frontiers in Pakistan, northwest frontier. Ghulam Rasool Shaida was the chair of the Stratford School Governors. And he was engaged in a battle over the role of the governors, nothing to do with faith, absolutely nothing to do with faith, Islam or Hindu or other religion, nothing whatsoever. But the evening Standard had an anti-Muslim Indian working for it. And he somehow managed to convince the evening Standard editors that this man, the Pakistani, to him, this is a Pakistani. That man was not a governor, but a Pakistani. So he wanted to taint this Pakistani with the worst possible associations. So he reported that this Ghulam Rasool Shaida was a supporter of the Muslims who had burned Sayyid Rushdie's book in Bradford and other stuff. Nothing to do with the school, nothing to do with the say or no say given by the head teacher Anne Snelling to the parent governors, who are majority of them Asian or non-European, because of the composition and the demography in the area, not because of a conspiracy. So when I saw this, that this man is being painted as a supporter of the campaigners against Sayyid Rushdie, I knew that that campaign had been hijacked by the racists and anti-Muslims, and who were trying to get this head teacher kind of exempted from all accusation of racism and obstruction that she was actively committing against the parent governors and especially against this Shaida man. So that's how I got involved. And so all the newspapers and the media report, including the Times and the Telegraph, because remember it was 1992, not the age of the internet, not the television age really, in the way that we are recording this program or broadcasting or streaming this one live from London. It was very different mode of kind of communication, mainly based on the print media and mainly limited to the likes of this. And on television, it was only the local or regional kind of outlets of the BBC and the ITV. There were no Sky television at that time. And the coverage by the BBC, I shall detail those in due course later, not necessarily today, but it will be one of the items I'll be expanding on. The coverage on the BBC was absolutely stupid, as was the ITV. Their line was nothing to do with schools, nothing to do with the parents say, nothing to do with the contents of the curriculum, nothing to do with any of that. It was who is controlling who and who is threatening who. And it's nothing to do with the school at all. And the Newsnight, which did an interview with me, I returned their check. I have not cashed the money, £40 or something they paid for my interview. I returned it to them. And what the Newsnight said was of the same line, but slightly differently kind of worded. So Newsnight failed to live up to its hype, even at that time, that it was their serious kind of television factual news channel. So the Observer went out of its way to literally belittle me. It had people standing next to me who are who are significantly and physically inches shorter than me. I mean, the Observer made me look several inches shorter than them. So that was the extent of the brazen distortion and fakery that the Observer and the Guardian indulged in 1992. That was a long time before fake news and Donald Trump. So I have been active, not by choice, but because of lack of choice, because nobody was speaking for Shahida. Nobody was speaking against the racist concentration of attacks on the school governors and the parents whose leader happened to be Muslim. That was happening. So it was long before the so-called era of the so-called jihadis and Shamima Begum. And we shall be returning to Dainford School, which is the school that got renamed several times by the time these three girls were seen leaving the Turkish airport or leaving through Turkish kind of airport for Syria in 2015, long time before that. So 15 plus 8 years. So 23 years before this happened. So there was no reason, there was no trace, there was no evidence of any radicalism or whatever. And yet the media, the Fleet Street, distorted the coverage of what I was doing, and they painted my intervention as a politically motivated kind of thing, but they couldn't pin me on anything that was illegal or unlawful, because I was not doing anything illegal or unlawful, and they were exposed. There were heaps, there were literally hundreds of faxes that got exchanged between myself and Matthew Dancona, who is now on the Evening Standard and writes a piece on the Guardian. Matthew Dancona was with the Times, and there was a Alistair McCall. Now, Alistair McCall was working for the Telegraph, and the Telegraph was being misedited by Max Hitler Hastings. So they got, all of them got the actual coverage, the contents wrong. How could they get it all wrong? Because they were following an agenda. They were not following the actual actions. They were not listening to me, and they were not examining the evidence. So that's what I am saying here, that this is world exclusive diagnosis of the media. It comes from a very deep and continuous and absolutely impeccable, original, authentic, ethical investigation. That is what I do every day. And that is what this is the representative part of this series of diagnoses. Essentially, what I am taking part in the presentation and the organization of is to create an atmosphere about the media lying, the awareness that the media is not serving democracy, has not served the democracy for the last 70 years. And it is about time the media should be held to account for democratic reasons, for ethical reasons, and for the reasons, as I have been saying, that were included in the aims and objectives of the United Nations by the people who wrote the script. And some of the some of the aims and objects and the original intentions for some of the legislation against racism that began to be included in the initial Race Relations Acts. Not at all enough, but the evidence of the intent was there. And the preambles more than adequately emphasize the positive and the good, universalizing criteria and purpose. So why did the media fail for 70 years? Why have we got racist discord and why have we got racist discrimination? Because the media wants it, and the media is controlled, its agenda, its contents are controlled by the big holders of power and levers of power in this country, in this society, who want racist division. Right. So when Claire Forges has a go, and she's not the only one, there have been others in the so-called quality papers, that is the Times and the Telegraph and so on. She says that giving out jobs and awards in line with criteria on race, ethnicity, or gender is well-meaning, but will reinforce division. Now that is totally shallow and ill-informed. I have been opposing ethnicity, ethnic criteria for jobs and whatever, for longer than she has been alive. But she has no awareness of me and my work because the media won't give its full coverage. All my comments to the Times and the Telegraph and the BBC, whatever, have been curtailed. They have been distorted. And I shall be referring to Sarah Bosley, the racist, who is now the editor, health editor of the Guardian. I shall be examining her in more than one edition because she wrote a completely pathetic, stupid, ignorant, contradictory profile of me in the Guardian in March 1992. The same month, March, all the researchers rushed to the archives and find the evidence of what I'm saying. March was the time when they got all worked up, the mainstream media, about what I was doing, as if I was going to stage a revolution from the Stratford school. I could have done, but there were hardly any kind of supporters supporting the revolution. I was the one who was working 24/7 in order to keep the media at bay and to put them right every time. So I had to work the equivalent of about 50 or 60 people that they were employing to counter me and to misrepresent the battle in defense of the rights of the parents in the Stratford school. And what is happening today in the media, as I said, Claire Forges in the Times on page 23, is a tip of the iceberg. It's very shallow. Because I have said, and I still say, and I shall continue to say, that opposing racism doesn't exist in Britain, in British institutions or agencies or employment field. And anyone who gets any decision-making option or appointment in the system, let's say a school teacher or a kind of police person or an MP, and consequently sometime as a minister or as a councillor. So giving some examples. None of these people that I have studied and I have encountered and I have known, and many of them I have encouraged to become councillors, this, that, and the other. None of them has lived up to even 1% of the promises, undertakings they gave to me personally to get my support and my wisdom and my intellect, my intellectual contributions. So these are the range of work that I've been doing. And Claire Forges doesn't know that as chair of the organization, that was set up before I joined it. I was invited to join it. An organization was set up in late 1982, and it was called BENT. Now it deserves to be spelled out, otherwise it will be misheard. Bangladeshis, with an apostrophe after the S, Bangladeshis Educational Needs in Tower Hamlets in London. So BENTH. Now it was misspelled, or the grammar was wrong when they spelled the Bangladeshis. They spelled Bangladeshis without an apostrophe at the end of the word Bangladeshis. So that meant that it was something to do with the Bangladeshis' educational needs and linked with Bangladesh. So I changed it to the correct context and added the apostrophe after the S and make it relevant to the local area, which was in the Inner London Education Authority. So when I became chair of the organization, I set up the monthly journal called BENT Bulletin, which remains to this day the unique kind of exercise, an educational policy, an action journal published in a visually competitive way, similar to commercially published outlets. I had no office. I still don't have an office, and I had no premises, and I had no resources. So I sat on my bed and put my laptop equivalent at the time, which was a kind of typewriter that was called the portable typewriter, on my lap and typed away. So the BENT Bulletin was one of the publications that I initiated at that time, which I followed a few years later by publishing a Black Parents Journal. And I shall be discussing the Black Parents Journal and the battle for rights for Black parents in the context of the performance of the schools in London, Inner London initially, and across the UK afterwards. And all the work that I have been doing have been empirical. These are not funded by the public authorities or public source, nor by donation. I've never sought any donation. So where I got the money, I will be spelling out in due course, but let me say about Ian Pissoff of the Private Lie. He said that somebody other than me paid for the cost of the publication of the Black Parent Journal. If anyone did contribute anything, that would be a contribution that would not be paying for, because if they had paid for me and my work, they would have had to sell their house. Or if they had a second mortgage, they would have to sell that as well. Because my time is worth as much reward or remuneration as anyone doing the same kind of quality of work in Fleet Street does. And nobody exists, has never existed, who has been working as hard and as thoroughly, reliably, and as consistently, evidentially as I have been. So I would have been paid £20,000 a day. Nobody, whoever they were, contributed even a fraction of that throughout the whole time they were supposedly involved. So I'll be discussing that at length, chapter and verse. And I shall show how corrupt and stupid and ignorant and prejudiced Ian Pissoff Hislop is. And that is the man who says that the rest of Fleet Street is a street of shame, because he claims that he is continuing the honest and ethical investigation of the contents of Fleet Street. He is not. And I will show the agenda again because that is very important. Now, see, Claire Forges or Fogis, whatever the pronunciation, is having a go at the ethnic kind of criteria for jobs. But she's missing the whole scene. Of course, it is going to reinforce division. But division only becomes relevant and acceptable as a kind of reason to kind of review the whole thing if racism, which is the main problem, that is a bar to jobs and to promotions and progress and whatever, to African people, Asian people, and in the current contemporary context, the Muslims, because it depends on which particular group is being targeted for virulent discrimination. And the Muslims are targeted as the virulently discriminated against group. I am not here speaking as a representative of any organization of Muslims as such. I am speaking as an evidential investigator, observer, based on the objective evidence gathered from all the available accessible sources. And when I said to the people who are campaigning for imposing a mayor in Tower Hamlets, and the campaigners were led at that time, let's say beginning late 2009 and early 2010, they were led in Tower Hamlets by the still local MP, George Galloway, Bethnal Green and Bow. And I said to a member, a female leftist member of the Labour Party from that constituency, who became known as a fan, as a small number of white persons in the Labour Party that supported Lutfur Rahman. I said to this person, I said, you are wrong. You are wrong to promote somebody based on their ethnicity. Not at all the reason that Claire Forges is talking about. I said that the local Bangladeshi community is the democratic kind of obvious group from where a candidate will be selected if the system is adopted. And I have spent all my time so far in opposing corruption in this community, as well as in the wider community. And I'm convinced that there is no evidence that this person who will be elected mayor, the first mayor, will be anything other than an extension of the corruption that already exists in the community, wider community, and also in the Bangladeshi community. Whatever the extent of the corruption, the actual behavior, corrupt behavior, will destroy the credibility and the moral stand that we have been taking, and we should take against corruption. This person, if she watches this, either now or at a later time or is being told about this, she knows who she is, and she can contact me to deny what I've said just now. If she contacts me, then she will have other questions to answer. So it would be best to provide actual evidence or apologize somehow for supporting this mayor system and then becoming a fan of Lutfur Rahman for purposes of propaganda in the pictures. Now these people in Tower Hamlets and those in Newham and the Evening Standard and the BBC and the Telegraph and the Times and the Guardian and the Observer, all of them misunderstood educational rights, and the objective criteria was thrown out, and there was no compliance with the legal obligations to oppose discrimination and to support transparency or accountability or objectively defined equality. So that is why I have been saying that the behavior of Boris Johnson is only symptomatic of the behavior of the rest of the mainstream and the rest of the main political parties and the main media that remain completely incompatible with the duties imposed by the charters, the conventions, the agreements, the treaties UK has been signing for the last 72 years since the foundation of the United Nations in 1948. So anyone watching this should understand the gravity and the seriousness of what I am bringing here to this program. It's world exclusive analysis and diagnosis of the media, of British politics, British political parties, and more, much more. So we shall be continuing with the other papers that are remaining there to be discussed and diagnosed, except the Guardian, which I shall catch up with when I get a copy of it later. Now, this is what, 9 minutes past 8 GMT in the morning of Monday, the 14th of September 2020.